Good morning. I'll call to order our regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. Today is June 22nd, 2017. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee, and we now have a quorum with Council Members Reich, Goodman, and Andrew Johnson. Today we have 8 items on our agenda. We usually start with the consent items. Today there are 2, which are items 5 and 6, and then we'll return back to the 4 items that are on the public hearing. And then I'll just note that items 7 and 8 that are listed under discussion are the rezoning applications for the 2 projects that are on the public hearing agenda. So items 5 and 6, the consent, are item number 5 is approving an application for an alley vacation for Rana Village. And item number 6 is a rezoning at 1303 Golden Valley Road to allow for conversion of an existing 1,500 square foot single family dwelling to an office use. And I'll move items 5 and 6. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Those carry. So that brings us back to the public hearing items. We have 4 items. The first is a variance appeal at 807 Broadway Street Northeast, and we'll start with the staff presentation. How many people would like to speak on this item? Okay, thanks.
Good morning, Chair Bender and committee members. On May 18th, 2017, the Zoning Board of Adjustment denied a variance by Jason Meyer of Quality Sign Solutions to increase the maximum height of an attached wall sign. The applicant has appealed that decision. So the property that it applies to is 807 Broadway Street Northeast. It's located on the north side of Broadway Street Northeast, and it's 1 block west of Central Avenue. It's located in the I-1 Light Industrial District and the Industrial Living Overlay District. The site is large. It's over 4 acres in size. It includes 2 buildings plus an on-site parking lot. The sign would be located on the west elevation, and it'd be visible from Quincy Street Northeast. The sign would serve Sports Engine, which is one of 27 tenants in the building, and it occupies the entire 3rd floor of the red section that's outlined on the floor plan. Here's a rendering of the proposed wall sign. It would be 46.75 square feet in size, so that's 17 feet wide and 2 feet 9 inches tall. It would be illuminated with LED. The variance is to increase the max sign height from 28 feet to 46 feet from the top of the sign. The applicant's reasoning is that it would be consistent with where the windows are placed on the building, and it would allow for better wayfinding from the parking lot and also from the adjacent public streets like Quincy and Broadway. It would help visitors understand the correct location of the building entrance, considering that there are multiple entrances on the site. The applicant has provided this rendering as well to illustrate how it would look if they were to comply with the 28-foot height restriction. Here's a view of that building wall from Quincy Street. And this is the southern portion of the property. This is the corner at Broadway. You'll notice that the sign that says highlight vertically, that actually received a height variance in 2015, and that was to increase the max height from 27 feet to 36 feet in height. And a condition of approval at that time was just to make sure that it was no less than 10 feet from the roof line. The painted wall sign on the east side of the building was deemed to have non-conforming rights, so they did not require variance to have that. Here's another view from Quincy, looking south. And this is a view from Broadway. So one of the key things that the applicant is stating is that in order for visitors to find the building entrance, they need to have the sign height as tall as they are proposing at 46 feet. This is how you would be able to see the building wall if you're heading eastbound on Broadway. Staff did recommend denial, and the board voted to adopt the staff findings. Staff did not find a practical difficulty in complying with the ordinance. We found that 28 feet would be feasible and would allow for sufficient wayfinding. As you can see in the renderings, even if you had the the attached wall sign lower on the building, it would indicate which building entrance was appropriate for Sports Engine. For finding number 2, whether the use of the property is reasonable, staff found that there would be it would be a reasonable use, but it's not related to the practical difficulties. We did have concerns about visual clutter, considering that this is one of 27 tenants in the building, and we've encouraged the applicant to explore other options, including a multi-tenant monument sign closer to the street to accomplish better wayfinding for Sports Engine and other tenants in the building, just to make sure that we don't see an accumulation of other attached wall signs for other building tenants. And because the proposed sign is illuminated, staff found that this could have adverse effects on nearby properties due to its proposed scale and height. It would be visible from residential uses that are across the parking lot and across the street from Quincy Street Northeast. And this could be also distracting to eastbound traffic on Broadway, but not likely detrimental to the health, safety, or welfare of the general public. Staff found that the finding whether the sign relates to the architectural scale and compatibility of the property, that we found that this finding is met, as the colors and the shape and the materials would relate to the existing property and the other signs on the property. It is a very large building wall, and the individual letters would only be about 15 feet tall, or 15 inches tall, excuse me. They'd be individually lit, and they'd be mounted onto an aluminum raceway that's compatible with the brown brick building. However, staff did find that the sign could be relocated to also comply with the maximum sign height requirements. The applicant has appealed, as I mentioned, and their statement reiterates the fact that the sign would improve wayfinding for those visiting the site, that there are between 40 and 60 visitors per day, and given that there are 4 entrances to the building, the sign would help direct traffic to this particular entrance. We have received one comment from a community member who's opposed to the sign because of its potential visual impact. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. As you noted, this went through the Zoning Board of Adjustment, and I noticed there was some discussion there about the illumination of the sign. Can you talk more about that? So the illumination, is that allowed as of right in the lower height location?
Yes, that would be allowed. That's allowed at the lower height location, yes.
And then I just wanted to note again that I saw there that the board members were discussing the kind of trade-off between having the illumination at the higher level or the sign as of right at the lower level. What would be the action to take if the committee wanted to approve the variance but without illumination? Is that an action that we could take?
I believe so. You could just add a condition of approval that it could not be illuminated. Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from staff from the committee? Okay, there are none. So we'll open the public hearing for this item. Why don't we have the applicant, the property owners or team come on up? Thank you.
I'm Jason Meyer with Quality Sign. Good morning. You want all of us up here at once, or?
Oh, that's fine. However you wanted.
I'm here basically to answer any questions you guys might have regarding this. Again, we're reiterating that it's really a sightline thing. First and foremost, to get people to go to the right door right away for Sports Engine. There's a parking lot across from Quincy that this sign would be visible from that the Able Brew House blocks. And then secondly, and one other thing that I wanted to note, I when I submitted the variance, if I move, how do I get that to go? Okay. I submitted this with the variance application to kind of show where the sign would need to go to be acceptable without a variance at all. And it doesn't seem very fitting to us. It's kind of placed in the middle of the building. It just, first and foremost being that we need to get the visibility. Secondly is to make it look like the sign belongs. Just wanted to reiterate that. So any questions or anything that I can answer?
And just to clarify, you're the property owner?
No, I'm the applicant. I'm the sign
owner.
company.
Okay.
Quality Sign.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Is the property owner here? Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. Does anyone have any questions for this gentleman? No, we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else would like to come up? Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Charlie Nestor with Hillcrest Development. I'm the development and leasing manager for Hillcrest, and we're the owner of 807 Broadway. We're here to support our client, Sports Engine, who's the primary tenant at the building. Sports Engine has approximately 400 employees that come in on a daily basis, and they have 60 to 100 clients who visit on a daily basis. I think everybody here remembers what it used to look like, and we completed renovation. The building is 100% occupied. We have approximately 700 clients, tenants who come in and out of the building on a daily basis. And so what we've worked hard at in all of our buildings in the Twin Cities, or primarily Minneapolis, is we don't like clutter. We like our buildings relatively clean. We don't like to hang a lot of signage. So we worked very hard to minimize signage on the building initially, and we worked with staff to work with kind of the attributes that were there. So when we first started, we had the banding along this side, which is the historic signage. We did the corner signage on Broadway, and then we have Able Seed did a painted sign on their building, and we have Empire Coffee and Bakery has a small sign right by their entrance. We have a few, because we now have 27 clients in the building, and we have 4 entrances that can be used on any given day. All of them really in the core, not on the outside of the building or on Jackson. We've been working towards finding better wayfinding for our clients. The main tower, where we're talking about putting the Sports Engine sign, where we would like to place it up on the top of the band, is the primary entrance. And because Sports Engine has 2/3 of the 3rd floor, and they have the predominant number of employees as well as visitors, it's a twofold. It helps with their brand, which when they started as 5 tenants with us over in our Mid-City Industrial Building, and now they're over 400, we certainly want to help them grow. They're the jobs that Northeast Minneapolis would like. And it also is a wayfinding both to get from the parking lots as well as if you're coming east on Broadway. There are a number of sections of the building that go over 4 stories, and it's a busy street. People can get to the building, but they don't necessarily find an easy way to find the entrance. And we believe that the sign is a twofold for both Sports Engine as for the rest of the tenants. And also with all the activity going on to the north on that street, it will only get busier. And I think we're all in the neighborhoods all working to maintain the legacy street and the nature of it while working all together. So our goal is to try and get our clients and our visitors off the street into the parking lot as easily as possible. Thank you.
Thanks. So I noted that again at the Board of Adjustment meeting, there was some discussion about future applications of signs and concern about the overall amount of clutter that might occur if all 27 businesses in the building wanted to put up exterior signs. Could you speak to that as the property owner and how you're approaching that? I know there was also discussion about the constraints of the site for putting up a monument sign.
Yeah, when we first were working on signage for the building, we had talked to the city about a monument sign, and I think everybody walked away saying a monument sign's not the appropriate thing to place on Broadway. It's already busy enough. We don't want people kind of slowing down to see if that's the right spot. Because we've moved all the entrances from the property into that inner ring, so to speak. That's really where the best wayfinding and signage, once you get into the area, we feel is. We do have a small signage by the doors, and we do not anticipate any additional or larger signs. That being said, I can't speak 5 years from now if another client grows and takes a whole floor of the building, would we look at other? We're certainly open to working with staff on an overall signage plan. I know overall, we're way below our signage allotment. It's really about the height. And one of the concerns, one of the neighbors was concerned about the lighting. We would certainly look at, and I can't believe our client would be open to having the Sports Engine sign be on a timer. So in evening or after hours, after 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I think we can figure a way to make that work. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the property owner? There are none. Would anyone else like to speak? Welcome.
Hi, I'm Greg Blasco, one of the co-founders and chief technology officer of Sports Engine, the company on the third floor. I'd just like to reiterate Charlie's comments here on the sign. Being in the building here for 2 years now, and even being the primary tenant, the largest tenant in the building. We've had challenges obviously with people coming and going, visitors and other community events at night with those 4 doors. And what we see on Broadway is that being such a busy street, you have Jackson and Quincy, and oftentimes people think they should pull in on Jackson and then they have to pull back out and make left-hand turns onto Broadway. And it's actually caused lots of accidents on Broadway as well, because they pull into Jackson or they pull into Quincy and they think it's around the corner and they're making left-hand turns. And there's been numerous accidents reported on that Quincy and Broadway intersection. So with the sign height being up at that 46-foot proposed height, you can easily see it when you're on Broadway and as you're approaching the building, especially with a large amount of our visitors coming from 94. It helps at least in that wayfinding to get to the right entrance and not going back out onto Broadway unnecessarily. So that's really the reason, obviously, for the height. And then secondly is, we do a lot of community events at night as well, and we're certainly open to putting that sign on a timer during late evening hours, so it isn't a distraction to any of the nearby neighbors that would maybe see it. There's very few, actually. If you look at just across the street on Quincy there, I think there's 5 or 6 houses, and we were standing over there. I think maybe 2 or 3 could actually see the sign from their second story windows. So in terms of the impact there is pretty minimal as well.
Thank you. Any questions? We're glad to hear your business is growing. Thanks for being
Thank
here.
you.
All right,
Thanks.
would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Reich?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the case has been pretty well made. It may not be a technical, practical difficulty, but there's certainly a unique context and circumstance. Also, the track record of the property owner is not many buildings, not a lot of clutter. As a matter of fact, we probably have more clutter in some of my commercial corridors than any of the buildings that they operate. Also, I would say that, in terms of precedent, if they don't have a unique circumstance in my eyes, I can say no to the next applicant if I feel it's not fitting for the area. Also, the context means a lot as well. I mean, this sign would be dwarfed by the big, huge G that looms behind it in this particular area. So I will move to grant the appeal.
Thank you. Councilmember Reich has moved to grant the appeal. Just given that the project team, could I ask, is staff comfortable with the condition of approval that would speak to the timing of the illumination? I don't know if that's really necessary, but since everyone brought it up, I just thought,
Chair Bender, that would be fine.
I don't know.
So then I guess the motion would provide facts of finding to support the action before us.
Okay, so then we would be, the motion would be then to grant the appeal with a condition of approval that is, I suppose, asking our staff to work with the development team to set an appropriate time in the evening hours when the sign would not be illuminated. Does that work for staff? All right, any further discussion? We'll make sure the clerk gets a written version of that. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. That concludes item 1. Okay, that moves us along to item 2. I just want to note that items 2 and 3 are separate land use applications and appeals, but they're very close in proximity to each other geographically. So I've asked staff to just begin briefly before starting with item 2, just give us some of the overview and context of how these sites orient to each other. So Mr. Crandall, I believe we'll start with that, and then he'll move into item number 2. We'll hold the public hearing for item number 2, and then we'll move separately into the third item. So I know some folks are probably going to want to speak on both of the projects, but just since they're separate applications, we'll handle them as 2 separate items. All right, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Crandall.
Good morning, Chair Bender, committee members. Peter Crandall, Senior City Planner with CPED Land Use. I will provide some brief context on the 2 appeals that will be before you today. The 2 sites are shown here. They're located in the Sheridan neighborhood of Northeast Minneapolis on a block that is facing Marshall Street Northeast and bounded to the north and south by 14th Avenue Northeast and 13th Avenue Northeast. This is kitty corner from the Grain Belt Brewery complex and contained within the Grain Belt Activity Center, which is an adopted activity center in the Minneapolis Comprehensive Plan. The project that I will be addressing is the project at the corner of Marshall Street Northeast and 14th Avenue Northeast, shown here outlined in red. This application includes the parcel that currently houses Dusty's Bar. This is an aerial view of the site as it stands today. Dusty's Bar is on the southernmost parcel. The northern parcels are currently either vacant or occupied by surface parking. This is a view of the property from Marshall Street Northeast. You can see Dusty's Bar in the back of the photo. This is a view of the property immediately across the street and the Grain Belt Brewery in the distance there, and a view of the property from 14th Avenue Northeast. The food building is immediately across the street from the property to the north. So the project that I will be addressing today was approved by the City Planning Commission at a meeting on April 10th. It's an application for a 6-story, 110-unit residential building. The original application included a rezoning from C1 to C3A. That's the C1 Neighborhood Commercial District to the C3A Activity Center Commercial District. A conditional use permit to increase the maximum building height, a variance both to the minimum parking requirement and the minimum loading requirement, a variance of the rear yard along the alley, site plan review application, and then a preliminary and final plat of the property. I'll address some questions about the rezoning first and then go into the details of the project, as this project has been to several meetings prior to this one. First, the applicant is seeking a rezoning from the C1 Neighborhood Commercial District to the C3A Community Activity Center District. You can see the parcels outlined here on the zoning map in relationship to their context. The policy language around activity centers calls for a mix of uses with citywide and regional draw, high intensity of uses, employment, commercial, office, and residential uses are all appropriate. And it calls for high density to very high density development dependent on context. Just some context in the policy for what that means. High density housing is defined as between 50 and 120 dwelling units per acre. Very high density housing, 120 to 200 dwelling units per acre. The proposal before you today is calculated at about 171 dwelling units per acre, so right in between those two. The maximum floor area ratio, which is the way that we regulate bulk in the zoning code today, in the C3A district is 2.7, with a 20% bonus for enclosed parking. That brings the maximum floor area ratio for this project to 3.24, and the proposed floor area ratio is 2.96, so within those guidelines. This shows the Grain Belt Activity Center within the context of other adopted activity centers in Minneapolis, outlined in red here. Activity centers generally coincide with some of the more important corridors in Minneapolis, including adopted commercial and community corridors. The Grain Belt Activity Center is at the intersection of 4 different adopted community corridors, including Marshall Street Northeast, which the property fronts on. This map shows the 2 project sites within the Grain-Belt Activity Center. It also identifies the Metro Transit 11 bus line, which is a high-frequency bus line, and illustrates the quarter-mile distance that we use to measure the transit incentive to reduce the minimum parking requirement for both projects. So both projects are qualifying for our reduced parking transit incentive, which allows projects that have greater than 50 units to reduce their minimum parking requirement by 50%. So this graphic illustrates some of the differences between the original land use application that was approved by the City Planning Commission on April 10th and a proposal before you today that includes modifications that the applicant has made to the project after collaboration with the neighborhood. So the number of dwelling units is the same at 110. The required parking stalls are the same. In the original application, the applicant was seeking a parking variance to reduce the minimum parking to 47 stalls. The applicant has added additional parking to the enclosed parking within the building that brings the total parking spaces up to 67, which is a 12 space surplus to the requirement. The Dusty's parking lot is proposed as was originally proposed in the land use application. And the applicant additionally has added a small retail space along Marshall Street Northeast after the neighborhood expressed interest in the project, including some commercial space, and to comply with land use guidance that the project be of mixed use character. Additionally, the building massing has been reduced at the rear of the property to 5 stories to transition to the single-family residential properties behind the project. So again, a metric showing those changes. These changes have resulted in the applicant requesting the withdrawal of the variance to the minimum parking requirement. That would leave the rezoning application, the conditional use permit for building height, a variance to the minimum loading requirement, a variance to the rear yard requirement, and then the preliminary and final plat before you today. These are some illustrative floor plans to illustrate the differences between the original application and the proposed modifications before you today. The proposed retail space is located along Marshall Street Northeast. You'll see that the rest of the building frontage along Marshall is occupied by active residential uses, including a bike repair station, lobby, and fitness center. And then the parking is accommodated in an at-grade enclosed parking structure that is accessed from 2 points. One along the drive entrance to Dusty's parking area, and then one off of 14th Avenue. And then floor plans of the above floors. This rendering shows the massing change between the original proposed land use application and the one before you today. You'll see the rear portion of the structure has been reduced by 1 story. Another view of that condition. This is the view of the project from Marshall Street Northeast. Elevation, north elevation showing the massing reduction. And then an overall context showing this project in relationship to the other proposed project before you today, as well as the Grain-Belt Brewery shadow study. And then this just illustrates some of the active uses along Marshall, including the retail space. So again, the applications before you today are after a request for withdrawal for the minimum parking variance, a rezoning application from C1 to C3A, conditional use permit to increase the maximum building height, variance to reduce the minimum loading requirement, a variance to the rear yard requirement, and the preliminary and final plat. Take any questions?
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for staff? I'll just note that we did have a public hearing about this on May 18th, and then it was postponed to today's meeting. So, okay, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing then. And let's see. Why don't we start with the project team, just kind of describing the changes that have been made based on the feedback from the last public hearing. And then as we do, we would reserve the opportunity for you to respond to anything that you hear during the comments.
Good morning, committee members. I'm Carol Lansing. I'm an attorney at Fakery Baker Daniels, 90 South 7th Street, representing the project team. So, just a couple slides for orientation again. This is the zoning map. This is the site for the 14th project that we're talking about. What I wanted to point out is that we're requesting C3A zoning, which has a 4-story height limit, and this site is surrounded by R4, industrial, and close to OR2, all of which also have a 4-story height limit. So it is consistent in that respect with the surrounding zoning. And this you probably have to zoom in a little bit on. Peter did show you the location of the activity center that we're talking about. I just wanted to add that this area here along 13th is a neighborhood commercial node, and I'll talk a little bit more about the differences on those. And I'll also be referencing some of the other projects in the area, so just wanted to point those out to you. On this aerial, this is actually the other project, item number 3, but I like the aerial. This is the project site for 14th, project site for 13th. Here are the Grainbelt Apartments, Grainbelt Brewery. I'll also be referencing this apartment building, which is Crescent Trace, and a public housing project there. So as Peter pointed out, the height is reduced in this wing to 5 stories. I also wanted to say that, so the back height now adjacent to the alley is just under 55 feet. So it's, 56 feet is allowed as a right across the alley. And this part of the wing is also set back 10.5 feet. So there is a good transition between the 6-story height along Marshall and the residential neighborhoods and the smaller scale commercial across the street.
Ms. Lansing, could you just explain how the bulk and height were reduced without reducing the number of dwelling units? Were the units made smaller?
Sure, yep, thank you. I did mention this last time, but it's good to point out. Bulk was added here, so you see there's no units coming off of this Marshall wing on the east side, so apartments were added there. It's not as close, it's set back quite a bit from the residential neighborhood, so it doesn't really push mass towards the alley or towards the R4, but it does allow them to recoup some of their residential density. And then, as I was saying, the height is similar then to these other apartments. The Grainbelt is 4 stories, 56 feet, although it appears as 5 stories on the Marshall side because of the grade changes that occur here. Crescent Trace is a 5-story, 62 feet tall property, and this public housing apartment building is 7 stories. So this will not be like the first building that's going to be over 4 stories in this neighborhood. And it is situated away, the height of it is situated away from the lower density neighborhood. In terms of elevations are also useful because above sea level because of these grade changes. And so I wanted to point out that at 888 in elevation, it's only 6 feet higher than the 4-story Grainbelt apartment here at 882. And it is shorter than the Grainbelt, and particularly it's 67 feet shorter than the towers. So it's not out of scale with surrounding other multiple family dwellings. It won't diminish the dominance of the Grainbelt, also because of not only is it shorter, it's also pretty far away, separated across the street and down the block. And I know that's a concern of maintaining the prominence of that building. So at the last hearing, there were additional revisions, and Peter has mentioned that there's more parking, and the way that was achieved was realizing, the project team got creative, that there was enough height span on the lower level of this building to do mezzanine parking. And so now we're 12 stalls over the parking requirement. In our discussions with the neighborhood, it just keeps coming back to parking, and that's where the discussions tend to end. So this is, a really, good faith effort to maximize the parking that can be in this building. One of the reasons that the city council reduced the parking requirement for projects like this near transit to 0.5 per dwelling unit was because they recognized that the cost of building parking, about $25,000 a stall, increases cost of the building overall, of course, and then that has an effect on rental rates. And just to let you know that this is relevant to this project, the rents on this project for a 544 square foot unit, in an uptown project in Revel, the rents there for that size unit are $1,535. For this building, they're proposing to rent it at $1,235, so $300 less. The Grainbelt Apartments, so the project that is a block away, for that size unit, they're currently advertising it for $1,400, so not quite $200 more. So these units, because of their smaller size and because of not having to spend as much on the building because there's less parking, will be more affordable, and that was one of the goals of the parking reduction. Another hope was that it would encourage people to not need cars, and we have some information about that too. In other CPM projects, they are that have similar unit sizes and locations near transit, their actual parking demand is less than 0.5. So for example, the Chroma project at 26th and Stevens, it has a 0.37 parking ratio. They're 90% leased in that, and they still have a couple spots left. So, it's not close to 1-to-1, it's not even 0.5. Another example is the Spectrum apartment in Marcy Homes. Some people think that's student housing, but 70% of it's leased to non-students. And their parking ratio is 0.34. They're 65% pre-leased, and only half the available parking is booked. So it is true, their experience is that what they're saying here is with the size of units we have, with the proximity to transit, and maybe with just some change in the culture, they're confident that this parking will actually be more than they need, and maybe be able to share some with others in the area.
Councilmember Goodman has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the idea that you'd have less parking close to a transit corridor. But what I don't support is this assertion that this is going to be some sort of affordable housing, and therefore they should be able to reduce the cost by reducing the cost of parking. Is Mr. Oberpiller willing to guarantee that a percentage of these units are going to be actually affordable for a period of time? How do we know that what is $1,235 when he opens doesn't turn into $1,400 within a year? I mean, I would urge you not to throw out there, well, this is making it more affordable. Of course it's more affordable in this location than it is in Uptown, because a house in Uptown that's $500,000 in this neighborhood would be $275,000. So I get offended when you suggest that he should save money because these units are more affordable and he shouldn't have to put in the parking because it will cost more, it will help him keep down rents, when there's no promise or commitment to make any of this housing affordable at all, correct?
Councilmember Goodman, that is something that we'd be willing to discuss. I don't think we can do it on the floor, but that is something that they would consider. But the point was, it is more affordable. And it is more affordable than the grain belt just a block away.
It's affordable for like what he's saying in front of us right now, but in terms of what the actual rents are when this building is rented up and what they increase year after year, there's no requirement, there's no commitment, there's no promise that these units are going to be at this rate. That's what you're saying right now. So I would urge you, I buy your argument on the parking, actually. So, but to throw out there that this is going to be affordable, or it's more affordable than Uptown, big deal.
Well, and as I said, more affordable than other projects that aren't in Uptown. And that was, my point was, this was part of the goal of the parking amendment. And there's a lot of consternation about the parking levels in the building. my point was it does serve the purposes that the amendment was made for. And in terms of true affordable, as that's defined for by city ordinance when you're looking for subsidy, that's something we can talk about. But these units will be more affordable than the grain belts, and with some that have to provide more parking. It's just the economics. And there's a competitive reason for CPM to try to keep rents lower than their competitors. If they can.
I would throw around affordable only if you're willing to commit to it. So if Mr. Oberpiller is willing to get up here and say, yep, right now I'll commit to 20% of the units being affordable at 60% of the Metro-wide median, then that's something to chew on in terms of whether or not he needs the extra density.
Well, you can, Councilmember Goodman, the point is they're exceeding the minimum parking requirement, and that is an ordinance.
Yep, I
amendment
bought that argument 10 minutes ago.
then-
I wouldn't have brought up the affordable argument if I were you, if you couldn't actually follow through on it. I already buy the argument and support the point that you should have less parking if you're close to
Okay.
transit. I would have left it at that and not
Okay.
suggest that this would be affordable.
All right.
Thank you
The-
both for that discussion. I think I would just note that, I mean, I think that it's clearly a fact that parking is expensive to build. I think Councilmember Goodman is also pointing out that market rents are set by the market, and so it's unpredictable in the future. You might argue that a building that has fewer amenities, including parking, would stay lower in the market. But anyway,
That's
it's kind of a philosophical discussion we're having here, and probably get back to I mean, I appreciate the comments, but yeah.
The other change was addition of this retail area, because there were comments that mixed uses in this building was also important to the neighborhood. And so what were live-work units have been replaced with retail. And the goal, as Peter mentioned, is to provide a very active engagement with the street. There's the one retail, but there's also not just a bike shop, but it's kind of a hobby shop with garage doors that open up, the fitness in the lobby, to do as much as possible to bring the residents and activity to the street. So, let's see. Being particularly messy with my notes today. Then the other another area of discussion that we had last time was what zoning district. At the last hearing, I talked about how C3A zoning district works hand in hand with an activity center land use guidance. It's designed to promote mixed use and residential density. The number of residents that will be in these projects, in both these projects, are going to they're going to be a boon to the existing restaurants and small businesses, artist studios that are already in the Grain Belt and will attract more activity. But it was also pointed out last time that all activity centers are not, by Councilmember Goodman, are not uniformly zoned C3A. Sometimes the change to C3A zoning will happen with a rezoning study. Most often, it happens on a project-by-project basis, and most often an application for C3A in an activity center is approved. So I started thinking about your comments about the activity center in your neighborhood and looked at the Loring Park activity center around south of the convention center around Nicollet. And I understand that there was a rezoning study for that small area plan, and they considered C3A and decided to postpone doing that because there were other studies going on that they wanted to take into account. But also what I understanding from that was there was a concern about the existing storefronts there and the businesses there, and would C3A kind of blow those out of the water. I understand that concern, and that's why C1 is an appropriate type of zoning, particularly for neighborhood commercial centers like the one further east on 13th that have that existing storefront and business character. This is not that. The only thing C1 zoning will do here, as I said in the letter, is preserve vacant parking lot and an auto-related use. You can't artificially create that environment, and it's not feasible to redevelop at that low of an intensity. So I do think while there are differences between activity centers, in this case for these sites, C1 would be detrimental and not do what it sometimes can do in other areas. I should have said the architects and Dan Oberpiller are here if you have questions for them, but I wanted to go over the changes and our basic reasons, give you some more data, and then conclude by saying we know that these projects, both projects, represent a big change on this block and in this neighborhood. And the concerns I hear remind me of the trepidation and reactions that we heard when development was happening along vacant industrial land along the Greenway. And at the edge of a neighborhood. To me, they're pretty similar situations, and understandable that this is a change that some people will resist. It's also been said that the developer just designed the building they wanted and plopped it down here without consideration of land use plans or neighborhood interests, and that's not true. It's consistent with the land use plans. Planning staff agree with that. The Planning Commission agreed with that. It is mixed use, it is high density residential, and that is what's called for by the city plans. The zoning, scale, density, and the number of applications, types of applications required for this project are in line with what you see for similar projects and that are routinely approved by the city. And finally, we were talking about parking. That really has been kind of a stop issue in discussions with the neighborhood, but we're exceeding the parking requirement, and so concerns about parking can't be a basis to deny any of the applications for this project. We urge you to to deny the appeals, and we're here for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the project team? Councilmember Goodman?
Perhaps this is a question for Mr. Crandall, and I wasn't paying close enough attention to it. There is a small area plan adopted in this area, and the activity center is called out specifically by the neighborhood, and there was a neighborhood process that determined that this should be an activity area, which would facilitate the increase in change in zoning.
Chair Bender, Councilmember Goodman, yes, the small area plan does identify this site as within the activity center and calls specifically for mixed use and for new development to be concentrated within the adopted activity center.
And this was a plan that had been adopted in recent times, 10 years?
2014,
So recently.
recently.
And the Sheridan Neighborhood Association was involved in that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councilmember Reich? Is that old? Okay, no problem. So continue with the public hearing. I think I'll ask if there's anyone who'd like to speak in favor of the project first. Okay, come on up, please, and then we'll give each speaker 3 minutes after the sort of main presentation. Welcome, and please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Kevin Petrie. I live at 1429 Grand Street. As far as the height of the building goes, 6 stories is fine. There's taller buildings in the neighborhood, including Friendly Manor and a few other apartment buildings. The more units we have in the neighborhood, it reduces sprawl to the suburbs, which is good environmentally. And the hope is that more residents who live in the neighborhood, that there's more support for neighborhood businesses. Like was previously mentioned, increasing parking increases the cost of housing. It promotes driving. It's an environmentally friendly solution to our transportation needs. We do have wonderful transit and bike paths in the neighborhood, and that hopefully that will remove some cars from our streets so we can make them a little safer. As far as the brought up with setbacks, they're in my opinion a waste of space that could be used for either housing people or commercial space. And more importantly, hopefully that this will bring some relief on some rents at certain price points. It's not a silver bullet for affordability in the neighborhood, but it does start that way. And hopefully we as a city should support places for people to live instead of places for cars or other uses. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak in favor of the project? Come on up. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Jasha Johnston. My address is 2414 4th Avenue South. I'm partners with Daniel Oberpiller in terms of purchasing Dusty's Bar, and I just want to assure everyone that our intentions are to keep Dusty's Bar consistent as it has been in the past. It's like an iconic place, and we want to keep it that way. We've been meeting with Pat, the current owner, and he's assured us, we've assured him that we'll continue to run Dusty's as it has been, and I'm in favor of the project. as far as building up and developing Minneapolis and keeping residents in Minneapolis instead of moving to the suburbs, and that we just fully intend to keep Dusty's Bar the iconic historic place that it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, with that, why don't we switch over then to the folks who've appealed the project. Is there someone who'd like to give kind of a main presentation to begin? So we'll give you a little extra time, just noting again that we did have a previous public hearing about this, but of course there are design changes now. So I'll just watch the clock. I'll give you a little extra time, and then just like we did, we'll give each other speaker 3 more minutes.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Bender and council members. I'm Jenny Fortman. I live at 1515 Grand Street, and I'm speaking on behalf of Sheridan Neighborhood and the appellates for the this appeal. I will actually kind of combine both so that when it comes to the second, we won't need as much time probably. And I'm going to kind of go point by point, so hopefully I'll cover everything. If other people have things to say, then you know, maybe they'll just be something I forgot, or hopefully we're not too redundant. So we are here today to ask you to support our appeal and to not rezone to C3A. Sheridan has been working with CPM on these 2 developments for, I think it's over a year. I want to say it was a year ago, May. We have been, you know, we have had many discussions. We've given each other quite a lot of time, actually. But in that time, unfortunately, we have not succeeded in finding something that is mutually beneficial. We do recognize that in the last 10 minutes of our last meeting, they did come up with some solutions that moved in the direction of the community, and we do appreciate that. On total, however, the real problem just comes down to the fact that these 2 developments shift a great deal of burden and risk onto the community, and really just do not do enough to support the demand that they would create. So it's not that Sheridan is anti-development in any way. We actually are interested in adding density to these sites, adding housing to our community, especially affordable housing. You know, we are grateful that there's interest in investing in our community. And you know, 20 years ago, the city of Minneapolis called Sheridan neighborhood a neighborhood in decline. Snow has been actively rejuvenating the neighborhood for these 20 years and building a shared vision together, and I think we have been quite successful. It's just that in the area of, you know, new urbanization, we do share a lot of those concepts. We do believe in pedestrian scale and bike infrastructure and adding density to the community. It's just that one size does not fit all. And this does seem to be trying to fit a one-size-fits-all solution into what is you know, what is just not quite fitting in. Sheridan neighborhood, we did a mailer in about mid-2000s, and we had 1,700 doors in the neighborhood at that time. Since then, we've added several large-scale developments, so we are at roughly 2,000 doors in Sheridan neighborhood. And this development wants to add a little over 200 more, which is adding 10% to the dwellings in the neighborhood. But the fact is they're actually doing it on really small sites. I noticed that every time they take a picture of the site, they use a fisheye lens to make it look larger. But I guess I have some very low-tech images to show you, but just to kind of go on a little bit. It is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. The lots are smaller. The houses are very close together. Most of them are duplex and triplex. We are over 50% rental already. Many of the streets do not have alleys, and so either people rely on curb cuts in the road, which reduces the number of street parking available, or they rely on the street altogether for being able to park a car. And being a predominantly blue-collar neighborhood, traditionally, in a very immigrant neighborhood, you know, my husband can't go to work without a car. So he's a contractor. Anyways, and there are many people like that. So If I show, it's the sheer scale that's really a problem. Is this? Well, let's speak to this zoning. So this is Sheridan neighborhood zoning map. And if you see, it's actually predominantly, all this peach color is R3, which is, I mean, we have almost no R1. Almost the whole neighborhood is duplexes or multi-unit housing of a smaller scale. And we're open to adding some density. To speak to the small area plan, we did do the small area plan in 2013. We worked with a firm to help us do that. You know, none of us really remembered the activity center per se, and we've had a lot of conversations trying to recall because certainly nothing of this scale was ever discussed. We discussed adding density certainly, but not to this level. So I remember thinking that activity center meant you could qualify for Great Streets grants, and that was about it. And if you do read just the first paragraph blurb of what C3A is, it says, I believe it says high to medium density, maximum 4 stories. So this is actually substantially different from that. And then with regard to our developer's attorney mentioned the C4, let's see, right here, C4 behind Dusty's. That's a remnant of like 60s zoning that the small area plan actually does address and recommends to rezone back to a more like the C3 duplexes that are there now. As you can see, this is Sheridan. There is nowhere with C3A in it. And here is all of Northeast. Again, there is nowhere with C3A in it. It's our understanding that, in fact, there's nowhere with C3A zoning anywhere in the whole, all of Plat 9, which is where the plat that Sheridan's located on. And C3A jumps 2 rungs from C1, which we would prefer, and which the 14th site already is. I mean, it jumps up 2 times, not just 1. So I just want to speak a little bit to the scale, understanding that the neighborhood is already a little more tightly packed than most, and that we already have fewer street spaces, and that we have actually rejuvenated the business district on, actually, let's look at that map again. The business district on 13th Avenue, which is here, and this is all C1. We actually envisioned C1 going all the way down to the river to activate the street and draw the business district down to the river. So we would like to see this industrial go to C1 and this remain C1. The businesses that are there, they're old buildings that we have, you know, kind of helped bring back to life and bring new light to, and they do not have parking associated with them. Many of them draw from a wide region and rely on street parking as well. And we as a community have worked with the business community and with our other partners and the churches and the school and come up with a lot of creative solutions, because it is not at all our goal to pave a spot in the neighborhood for every car that passes through. And it's, you know, and it's really not it's not really on my bucket list to stand up here and defend the almighty automobile, but it's a fact of the life of the community. So this is Dusty's parking lot on is it the wrong way? That's a Thursday. Now that's a typical Saturday, Sunday, Wednesday evening. You know, it's certainly not like that every day, but they're taking the majority of this. So, and leaving 14 spaces. The sites, show you this one. So right now the Grainbelt apartments were shown, well, it's a little hard to see. Can you see that? This is the Grainbelt apartments. There are 150 units. There are 150 parking spaces. And they're on, the groundskeeper estimates it's 4 acres there. They do actually already push cars out onto the street, which, I mean, we're not saying none of the associated vehicles can share the public street, but the fact is a 1-to-1 ratio already has proven to not be sufficient, and we know that theirs are all leased. In fact, they were trying to do a 50% visitor parking, but they had to convert them to resident parking based on demand. I'd like to mention that too in terms of CPM's ratio of cars being used in their available parking. I mean, they charge for the available parking, so it's not really a fair comparison to say they haven't leased them all. That doesn't mean that those people don't have cars. It means that they haven't paid extra for parking. And a lot of their housing is student housing, which means that those people are more likely to be without cars. Whereas I looked it up and I found a statistic that said in the city of Minneapolis, the ownership of cars is basically 1-to-1. If you go out to the suburbs, it's actually 1+ per person. So it's not unrealistic for us to think that people own and drive cars. Here, can you see? Here and here are the two sites for the Greenbelt developments. I don't know if they're visible. They're so small, but this is 150 units. This is 100 units. This is 110 units. The scale, the size of the lot, and the number of units they're trying to put on it are really where we're running into problems, because every time we did figure out a potential solution with the developer, some other problem was created. It's just the sheer size. I have another example, which you can't see. This is River Run Apartments. This whole area right here. There are 74 100% affordable housing units that face the river. Sheridan Neighborhood Organization was instrumental in getting them there. And we think they're a great asset to the community and would like to see more of that. But if you look at the size of this compared to the size of this is 74 units. This is 110. This has 74 plus parking spaces. This has 67, but this one has lower than 1-to-1. So between the two, they're at less than 60% considering, and that doesn't include the commercial. So they're really at about a 1-to-1 parking. Last image like this, they're adding 10% to the community. They want to add 10% on these two sites. This is 10% of Sheridan neighborhood right now. So if you took any one of these streets, this happens to be Washington and 6th back to back, but if you took any of these streets from Broadway to 17th and condensed them down into the size of the place where 6 houses exist, that's what they're trying to do. And it is that's making this very challenging. In terms of the parking reduction, the 50% parking reduction, we are near, I mean, clearly we qualify currently for the 50% reduction, but in 2015, when Sheridan did our small area plan, this would not have been something we discussed because it didn't exist. And even in 2015, this area was not part of the parking, 50% parking reduction, because the line had to add service like a few minutes closer together. So that was the change. And I did Google Map from the address to the bus stop, and it's a third of a mile in both cases. So it's really, for us, I mean, that's part of what we're saying. It's really on the edge of being super accessible in most people's mind to transit. But regardless, I take the bus and still have a car, you know, and not everybody works downtown. So what we're looking at is, you know, the potential of, you know, considering that this is a roughly $1,200 unit, which is the cost of a 2-bedroom duplex in Sheridan, there's a good possibility these are going to be double occupancy. If they're double occupancy, or let's just say half of them are double occupancy and 3/4 of the people drive cars, that is 100 cars onto the street. And that, you know, if the buildings were simply smaller, we just wouldn't be dealing with those kind of numbers. We're just asking that the size be reduced. And by size, I guess we mean units. They reduced the size, but they didn't change the number of units. We talked about the activity centers. So what we know is that the city has not, what we don't know is that the city has never done a transit study. But Sheridan has been studying this neighborhood for 20 years. And this zoning just feels wrong. We don't really want to set the precedent for more C3A in Sheridan. It seems to have kind of a cookie cutter, one size fits all approach to it, and Northeast would like to see, we would like to see Northeast develop in a more organic manner. If the developer's attorney mentioned that she thought that it was not feasible to redevelop at C1, we wholeheartedly disagree. We've seen many unusual buildings become very interesting things in our neighborhood, and that is much more desirable than just kind of cramming in as many people as possible. So what we would like is to ask you to honor our request, honor our appeal, and then rezone both sites to C1, and at which time we would hope to come back to the table with the developer and find something that is beneficial to all. They had mentioned that they that they have too much invested to walk away, and Snow feels exactly the same. So we would be happy to come back to the table with them and work towards a development that would work for everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for taking all the time as well. Okay, so now we will continue along with the public hearing and offer 3 minutes to each additional speaker. So the next person, come on up. And please state your name and address for the record. I do want to note that there is no longer a parking variance application, and so while I understand that's a part of the bigger picture here, the developers already added more parking than our requirements ask for. And so the other land use applications are really the height and some of the sort of the alley and loading variances. Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Karen Bernthal, and I have a building at 1509 Marshall Street, and I want to talk about two things that Jenny just kind of touched on. One of them is the variance for a 1/3 reduction in setback on the Marshall Street and 14th side. So that abuts the alley, which we've already talked about is very narrow. I think it's 12 feet. I'm not really sure, but I have, I think that's right, 12 feet. So the setback requirement is 15 feet. And in the developer's plan, 5 feet of that setback is the alley, which, anyway, I want to show some pictures of that alley so you can understand what that means. This works. Whoops. Okay, I don't know why it's not doing this here. Okay. So I took this picture this morning. This is 12 feet. On the east side, there is a retaining wall. So if you have a 12-foot alley and you have cars going through it at the amount that would be, I don't see where you would put the snow if you're asking for a setback reduction. This also has garages right near the property line. Another garage right near the property line. This is the corner of 14th, and this house is on 14th. So they are asking for a 1/3 reduced setback here. This is the house, somebody's home. Already they're going to be using this alley. I just think the setback is inappropriate for a number of reasons. One, it affects these people, and I mean, all these cars driving by that window. But two, presumably some of these properties would become developed. They would sell, and you'd have another developer, and then you would need to have another building. And the setback, I believe, is to keep people from looking in each other's windows. I mean, you want some air in between homes, because in the developer's plan or the city's comments, it said the only reason windows are required is because they are residential, and this was supposed to be commercial, but now it's residential. And so having windows on that facade requires a 15-foot setback. This also brings up another issue for me that I haven't talked about with the Sheridan Neighborhood Organization, but that is the facades on Marshall Street and 13th and actually 14th Street. And that is, this is a nascent activity center. All the other activity centers in Minneapolis are sort of fully developed with a lot of retail and a lot of activity. This is kind of an artificial activity center because the activity doesn't really exist yet. And what you're going to put here is going to affect how that activity center develops. And the neighborhood had a vision for it, which was mixed use and something that worked for the businesses and the hopefully commercial businesses. And stuffing this much residential on this activity center is artificial before this place can even become the thing that we hope it will become. I think this would, yes, add people, but also create a lot of problems.
I'm just going to note the time and ask you make
Yeah,
kind
I
of the
know.
final
It's
comment.
very hard. There's a lot of ins and outs for this project, and I mean, I have more to say. One of the things I want to talk about is to ask this is what I haven't discussed with Sheridan, but I think the entrance to all the parking should be in the alley, because this is one of the reused businesses that's successful, called the Draft Horse. This is right opposite the parking garage entrance on 14th Street. And Sheridan would like a path down to the river on 13th. And there are parcels ripe for development that the city owns right now. We can turn the corner and then come right back up 14th Street. And so I think we need to have active facades on 13th, Marshall, and 14th Street. And having the parking entrance from the alley would solve that problem for some of these businesses to remain a pedestrian-friendly place where people can stroll and feel comfortable and safe and not interact with cars. This is the view looking down 14th from the corner of Marshall and 14th Street. And on 14th Street, we have commercial buildings that could get reused in other ways also, are being used, but you actually have a direct line to the Sheridan Park and to some land that I think the city is going to put out a request for proposal soon. And so you would come down 13th, go to Sheridan Park, visit the river, walk back up 14th. I don't want to have to deal with cars coming in and out of a parking garage on 14th, because we have an opportunity here to make it more pedestrian friendly and the kind of activity center that the Sheridan Small Area Plan had in mind. One other, this is a technicality, but in the developer's plan, I don't know what this zoning is, but it's not properly labeled. It's not really even labeled. This is R3. There's a tiny little sliver, a triangle shape of R3 here, but that makes it look like this is R3. I don't know what that zoning is, but it's a lighter color, which to me means it's a less intensive zoning, and they all look like single-family homes to me, and this is the developer's site. So this is not labeled correctly. It looks like it's R3, but that's incorrect. Here is the developer's plan. Here's the alley, and here is the property line, and they're asking for that setback. And as you can see, this is the property line for the house, which is 2 feet away, basically. And now you're going to put this mass of a building here and grant a variance, 1/3 reduction? That's inhumane. Another point that I want to make is this is the picture of the Grain Belt Brewery. The heights of all of these that they went through to talk about the sea level height This tower, of course, is taller, but you can see what a small portion of the Grainbelt Brewery that tower is. The majority of the Grainbelt Brewery is lower than, I think, 4 stories. Here is the figuring for them. They have 893 as an absolute value from above sea level. Here's the real main part of the Grainbelt Brewery. 877. The towers are 955, but the majority of the building, the bulk, is smaller.
I just want to do a quick time check here. We're not going to be able to have every person speak for 10 minutes. I do appreciate so much your testimony, but it's
Are you asking me to stop?
just maybe a couple final points here. And
Okay. So I had done some drawings in perspective. This is, I guess, an old plan, but it's hard to keep up. This is just to show you that the scale in their schematic drawing is incorrect. And I do not think you can make an informed decision when the scale is not drawn correctly. It looks like it's a 3-story building. If you put the house here, you can see that it isn't to scale. I mean, I can go through this, it's very complicated, but if I were to do the scale that these buildings are shown in, you'd have to stretch their building and it would become that tall, and that's the actual scale if you were to draw it in scale. This is complicated perspective drawings, but that's what it would look like. I think that's it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time. Next speaker, please. Come on up. Please state your name and address for the record.
Joyce Smallfield, 1414 6th Street Northeast. And I just want to talk, a lot of points have been touched on. I want to talk about the 2 streets, 13th and 14th. Currently, 13th has a fire station located a block away from these developments. And because of the increased cars and when they take out the garbage from the grain belt, they have to actually pull the garbages out onto the street in order to unload them. The fire trucks have actually had to take detours that they should be able to come all the way down 13th and get to Marshall in order to respond to emergencies, but because of the congestion, they actually have to detour. This is only going to get worse. 14th has been a major problem in the neighborhood in terms of the building. She had shown you a picture of the 2 businesses leading towards the river. The business as you're going towards the river on the left-hand side has pylons that actually had to be installed because the building had been hit so many times. I actually witnessed a car riding its hood, or the top of the car, down Marshall, because if you look at the road, right where 14th hits, the road curves, and it's a very dangerous spot. We, as a community, always thought that 14th would be a entrance to our beautiful new park that's coming up, and our memorial park that is there. And businesses like the Draft Horse add to that kind of welcoming glide into our park. But with the increased congestion, I can only say that I think this is going to be a very, very dangerous corner. And so that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. Anyone else like to speak? Please state your name and address for the record.
Robert Riskin. I live at 1117 3rd Street Northeast. And I just want to say that while I'm not right there on the corner, I have witnessed just an incredible increase in visitors to the area. Northeast has become quite a destination. And a lot of people come from the suburbs, a lot of people come from in the city to Northeast to frequent the wonderful restaurants and brew pubs and retailers that are there. And there's no place for them to park, frankly. And they are displacing, all of these visitors will displace current residents. Plus the grain belt apartments, there are more people who park on the street than pay for parking spots in the grain belt. And I would challenge you to come in the early morning hours or after work hours and just see how crowded it is. I'm also a representative of the Second Precinct Citizens Committee for Crime, and I must say that when you force people to walk further to their residences from where they have to park their cars, it is an opportunity for criminals to take advantage of people who are walking far distances to get to their homes. And I think we need to take the potential of additional crime into consideration when you consider this type of density and the likelihood that there will be more cars in the area. And with a bike lane that is scheduled to go on Marshall, that's going to decrease parking availability on Marshall alone on top of these two developments. And finally, my question is, so where's all the snow going to go when you have this alley that's going to be right up against the buildings, and I don't know where the plows are going to push all the snow when there's no border, and with all the cars on the street, I just wonder where the plows are going to put all the snow when they come and plow the streets. So those are my concerns. I think this development is too high, too close, too dense for the area. And I'd like to ask the Planning Commission when they plan to put up a public parking ramp for the residents of the area so that these kinds of developments could be more viable. Right now, without a public parking ramp, everybody's confined to street parking and they're all fighting for spots, and they're going to get worse if you approve this. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? How many more people would like to speak? Okay, come on up. Thanks.
Hi, Tim Kennedy. I live at 1121 3rd Street, and I guess I just want to talk about what they were talking about, the developments. The public housing has been here since, I don't know, the 70s. Where 101 was, Jacobs 101, now was in condos. They're all condos. People live in those, they buy them and live there. This is apartments. Affordable? We don't know yet. There's already been a raise in rents on that block for people living there already. So I'm not sure. They said that they fought about this. People were fighting about this on the Greenway. We don't have a Greenway. The Greenway was built, and then they built these buildings on the Greenway. So build the Greenway and put the buildings on it. That's fine. I'm opposed to it. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Would anyone else like to speak on this? One last call. Okay, come on up.
Thank you for the couple of minutes. I'm going to speak on the other side, on the pro side here. Mainly a couple points as far as the height variance. Oh, sorry, I'm Shane Peterson. I live in South Minneapolis. So having attended a few of these and seeing the changes around the city, I know a lot of times when developers submit their plan, the immediate thing is, well, it's too tall, it's too tall. And then once these buildings are built, you look at them and you go, I think it would have been 2 stories higher. It would have really wouldn't have been any different than what it was. And really, it's a concession to a neighborhood group at the end of the day. As a city of Minneapolis, looking, bigger picture of kind of where we want to move to when we're trying to lure businesses to the city, we're trying to lure more people to the city, yet we want to make smaller buildings, kind of runs contradictory. I think where if you have taller buildings, more space, more units, that leads to affordable housing. It leads to, more of a green deal where you do less parking, make it more of a transit hub, more bike friendly, more alternative modes of transit than just cars. So really, right now it's a surface lot. I think, obviously with all due respect to the neighborhood group, I think it's ripe for a development and just the changing face of the city. And I think we shouldn't get caught up in these small details in the name of progress.
Thank you. If anyone else would like to speak, come up.
My name is Mary Cassidy Homers, and I live on 408th Avenue Northeast, and I own a business on 13th and 3rd. Listening to the discussion here has been very enlightening in a lot of ways. I think when I first opened my business, It was because I loved the community. I loved the friendliness of it. I loved the caring of each neighbor for each neighbor. I think the notion of what made us great and made us come back after 20 years in the decline is that people chose to love their neighborhood, to invest in their neighborhood, to be their neighborhood. The notion of development, none of us are opposed to that. I think my concern, and it's a huge concern, is that it has to be done with the consideration of those people who founded that community, who have invested in that community, who have grown that community, who have made it ripe for investment, and are kind of ignored and are part of the shadow world. And I think that the notion of the fact that we're secondary to progress is unsettling. I think the notion of working together to do it so that it is to scale, so that it is affordable, so that it is part of the old school value system that we do take care of our neighbors and we don't cause harm to our neighbors by making a profit. I think there's a better way to do this. I'd like to see us act as good neighbors and to be considerate in how we develop. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? I think we need to wrap up here and have the other item as well. Okay, so seeing none, I will go ahead and close the public hearing and see if there's any motion or comment from my colleagues. And I just want to note, so we do have two separate items for this project. One is the rezoning, which is item number 7. And then the item 2 is all of the additional land use applications. I'd suggest that we take up item 7 first. That's the legislative decision, that's the rezoning, and then the other land use applications sort of rely on that decision. So I'll see if there's a motion on item 7. I don't know. I mean, I can do it, but I don't know these it. I mean, I can make the motion too. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While you're waiting for someone to make the motion, so that I just want to say I will not support the rezoning. I think that's the crux of the issue here, is that the neighborhood is unclear about what the change to C3A means. We've had this problem in my ward as well. C3A zoning is very intensive zoning, to be honest. It means hotels could be built in that zoning, and I'm quite sure, maybe Mr. Crandall can correct me, I think that that's where liquor stores are allowed if they meet the spacing requirement, and also gun shops. So isn't that correct? But okay, but a conditional use means allowed with conditions. So, I mean, C3A zoning is really intensive zoning, and there isn't any other C3A zoning in this entire plat map that might be an argument to do it. But to me, it's not. And I think that's the crux of the issue here, is the rezoning to create an activity area. I like the idea of bringing more people to the location, and I think having housing in this location would bring more things that would create an activity area, but I think the C3A zoning is too intensive. Perhaps a step to C2 would be appropriate, but that wouldn't make the developer happy because they couldn't build as densely as they would like. So I'm sure someone will make the motion, but I just want to speak out against the change in the zoning.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move approval of the rezoning, item number 7. I guess I could speak to that real quick.
Go ahead, thanks.
So I have activity centers in my ward as well, and I think about C3A zoning, and no project's ever perfect. It's not always the right height that we want, or the right size, or the right level of density, but this seems consistent with the other areas that I've had, and a lot of the arguments that I've heard against this mostly deal with parking in the area. And what I'm hearing is a lot of, I park on the street for free. I don't want more competition for free parking, so somebody else should either not be there so they aren't competition for my free parking, or I want somebody else to pay for parking that's private so it doesn't interfere with my free parking on the street. The reality is parking on the street is free for everybody, and there's going to be competition for it. And I'm completely in disagreement with this notion that when people have to walk further from their cars, that we don't want people to walk further from their cars because it's an opportunity for people to take advantage of them and for them to be victims of crime. If that's the case, then why are we, it's first off, it's not the case. Second off, we want people to be walking in the city. We want more eyes on the street. We want more activity in the activity center. We don't want people going from one garage to another garage and sneaking in and out and locking their doors on the way with their windows rolled up because we're perpetuating this notion that it's unsafe to walk out on the streets. And I just want to say I wholeheartedly disagree with that kind of mentality.
Okay, is there any further discussion on the motion to approve the rezoning? I'll just note, I spoke extensively about this at the Planning Commission where I did support the rezoning. And, you know, I think we have this conversation a lot. And in Minneapolis, we tend to leave the zoning, the underlying zoning the same even when we make policy change. And it does sort of put all the decision into each project. And we do that because it gives us more control over each project. And that's just kind of a trade-off we make. But I think the staff's arguments about why the C3A is the appropriate zoning for activity center, I've heard them a million times at Planning Commission. They do tend to make sense. And I think as we look through beyond the comprehensive plan update into other policy changes we might make, I think that we could probably do better with more nuance to how we're doing activity center zoning. We have been moving more and more toward a form-based code anyway, but part of the problem with C3A versus C2 is that there's a lot of use differences in them, and so the C2 zoning allows for a lot of uses that neighbors tend not to like, and so that's why the C3A zoning, even though it is technically more intense, it is also more restrictive in a lot of ways, and it tends to be that sort of more pedestrian-oriented use that neighbors typically say they want to have in these kind of walkable, transit-oriented neighborhoods. So anyway, that's kind of a little my view of C3A. All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
So that motion does carry. That brings us back to item number 2. One of the committee members has asked for a roll call vote, so I'll ask the clerk please to call the roll.
Councilmember Goodman. Andrew Johnson.
Aye.
Barbara Johnson.
No.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Worsame is absent. Chair Bender.
Aye.
That's 3 ayes, 2 nays.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So that motion does carry, and then that moves us back to item number 2, which is the appeal for the conditional use permit. The item 2.2 is now withdrawn. Item 3 is the variance for the loading area, and then the 2.4 is the rear yard setback. See if there is a motion on the appeal of item 2. Councilmember Reich.
I move to approve the appeal.
That was most. So Councilmember Councilmember Reich has moved to grant the appeal, which would then deny the conditional use permit and the 2 variances. Councilmember Fry is here, not a member of the committee, but we'd welcome him to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did actually have a couple of questions for the applicant. I don't know if that's appropriate at this point.
Sure, I'm happy to bring the applicant up to answer some questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lansing. As you are aware, the project has gone through several different iterations since the original proposal, which was at 6 stories. One of the iterations, so the present iteration in front of us for the 14th project has 6 stories in the front, 5 stories in the back. There was a previous proposal as well that had 5 in the front, 4 in the back. Is that still on the table in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, it was 5.
Correct.
There was a proposal, not, that we discussed with the neighborhood that would have done a 5-story building, uniform 5-story. but it required that the building footprint be extended behind Dusty's, where there currently is parking for Dusty's. We went that way for discussion to see if, height was something that we could address. And in our discussions, height really didn't seem to be the prime concern, but we also learned in talking with, and it also would have meant a parking variance for Dusty's. We've landed in a place where we have no parking variance for Dusty's and surplus parking in the project. So negative of the 5-story was parking variance for Dusty's, and also it would have required that we go through the application procedure again, and it didn't seem to address the neighborhood's concern about overall level of parking. We're able to do a higher ratio of parking in this 6-story, 5-story building than we could have in a straight 5, I believe.
Thank you. And is there any form of so I recognize that the Grain Belt apartments are going for somewhere in the range of 1,400 to 1,500 at the moment for a 560 square foot unit. Is there any form of assurance whatsoever that these are going to remain somewhere in the range of 1,200 per month for the same amount of square footage?
So maybe I can take that question. Daniel Oberpriller, CPM, Minneapolis, Minnesota. The unit type in the Grain Belt building has very few 550 square foot units or lower. At the time that the building was built, it's designed as more of a traditional apartment building per se. In the last 20 years of development, the 1-bedrooms are about 750 square feet and up. What we're seeing as times changed is, and different types of populations and unit mixes, as well as housing stock, that people are bringing less items to their buildings, and buildings are designed more efficiently. With the 110 units that are designed in this building, it is designed for a lower price per unit than that building, specifically because if you live in less square footage, you generally don't have it. What we're seeing is less cars, and you're also seeing less people in less square footage. If you are in a 425 square foot or 500.
So I apologize for interrupting, Mr. Oberpiller, but so my question is specifically about the pricing as opposed to the parking. We can get to the parking later.
Yeah.
So in other words, the advertisement is that the apartments are going to rent for somewhere in the range of about $1,200 for the 550 square foot apartment.
Correct. And we can make that math work and work well because of the size of the unit. And that typical unit stock has one person in it.
Okay. Is there, I guess so my question at this point is, I am concerned about the affordability. Sure. And I'm going to make an additional pitch about that after I'm done asking you questions. But will we have the ability by next Friday to have some form of assurances as to what the rent will be and by how much it will increase by?
Well, obviously, sorry, this is a private matter, but I'm happy to meet with council members to discuss that and how that would go. I don't know that I've ever done that before, so I don't know how that.
So here's what I'm going to do. So I appreciate it. So I don't have any further questions right now, and I'll just kind of give a. You could sit down. Okay. So I want people to be just keenly aware as to the conflict in some of the arguments that I've heard, and to be fair from both sides. And because, facts are important, and I think it's important that we relay the facts in public so that things are transparent and that we're all aware of exactly what is happening and why. So first, the project that is before us today is not the project that it was originally proposed. The project as originally proposed was 6 stories. In fact, I believe both proposals for 14th and 13th were in the range of 6 stories. And that is no longer the case. The height has been dropped by a floor in the backside, keeping the front side at 6 stories. But there was a proposal out there that reduced parking that dropped it by 2 floors on the backside and 1 floor at the front side. For every additional floor that you drop, 2 things happen. 1, it inhibits the ability to have additional units, and 2, it inhibits the ability to have additional parking. So for those that are arguing for more parking, the lower it gets, the more difficult it is to do additional parking. But here's the second thing, and this is the most important, that I really want people to recognize the play between these two concepts. It costs $25,000 per parking space to build. I'll say that again. It costs $25,000 per parking space to build. Now, you can advocate absolutely for additional parking, but if you're advocating for additional parking, you are advocating against affordability. I want to make that exceedingly clear. It is absolutely true. If you are advocating for more parking at $25,000 per stall, you are advocating against affordability. All things being equal, a unit that has an additional parking space with it is more expensive than a unit that does not have that additional parking space with it, because it costs money to build the parking space and the infrastructure to retain the parking. This should not be a controversial thing. It is a fact. So I want everybody to just recognize that fact. You can still advocate for the additional parking, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be more affordable. In fact, it'll be the exact precise opposite. So a few things that have happened. One, there has been, in the new proposal that the developer has brought forward in response to the neighborhood, and I appreciate, by the way, both sides with working with each other. The new proposal drops the height. That was the first thing that was asked for, and they did do that. The second thing that was requested by the neighborhood was retail. Retail was also added. The third thing that was requested was additional parking. The previous proposal was seeking a variance. This one is no longer seeking a variance, and it added 20 parking spaces. And finally, there was a request that this actually came from me, which was to make sure that we retain Dusty's for the long haul. It's a neighborhood staple. I think it does add a tremendous amount to the community, and I want to make sure that both that building as well as the business, if possible, remains. Now, I do share Councilmember Goodman's concern regarding the affordability. And it does make sense that you can't just call something affordable when you can advertise at $1,200 and then simply raise the rents then even higher than that. And so, what I want to see ultimately is I want to get to an answer that is satisfactory and functions. But I would also like to see some form of assurance that the rents are not going to rise sky high. And so I think at this point, what I will do, and I will say, I am supportive of the density. I am. Right now we're trying to add somewhere in the range of 70,000 additional residents to this city. And there's a massive question as to if in every area we are saying no, where ultimately is it going to go? But I do think that we can do so in an equitable manner, and that's why at the very least I would like to have an additional conversation with the applicant and the developer before next Friday. So rather than Councilmember Reich's motion, which was to deny, I would like to forward without recommendation on this particular one.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with postponing it one more cycle, but I'm not comfortable with some behind-the-scenes negotiation with the developer and council members where the neighborhood doesn't know what's going on. And then you come back to the council meeting on Friday with some deal already worked out that no one knows what it is, myself included. So if you want to continue so that we close the public hearing, I'm sure Councilmember Bender would appreciate that. We could close the public hearing or we can keep the public hearing open and continue one cycle, but either one of those is preferable to moving it forward without recommendation, because we have 20 people sitting here. We've received 70 contacts on this at least, And I don't think it's right, if it's 4 or 5 people who reach out to us, that's one thing, but we've had almost 100 people reach out to us, and I don't think it's right to just move it forward without recommendation, hoping this will go away by a week from Friday.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Goodman, I'll have to check with our attorneys as to whether we actually have the time frame to delay it another cycle, because I don't know that that's the case.
Committee members, the 60-day decision period was extended to July 15th. So keeping in mind that we would have to have not only full council decision made by that deadline, but also mayoral signature. We need to take a look at the calendar.
You could extend voluntarily.
Chair Bender, Councilmember Goodman, yes, that's what I was here to say, that we will agree and give it in writing to staff that we agree to toll this time period so that you can make a decision in the next cycle without running against the 1599 statute.
So to confirm, absent that extension, we would be going beyond our time limit.
Okay, so absent that voluntary extension, we would be going beyond the time limit Ms. Lansing has granted, so we're good on the legal time frame. So let's do that. And I want to make very clear here, as we make this extension, this is not an extension that's built around an agreement to tank the project. Right now, we have a massive housing shortage, and because of that housing shortage, rents are rising through the roof. Gentrification is happening. People are getting displaced, and specifically in areas of Northeast. It is happening. I mean, whether we like it or not, whether we want to admit it or not, it is happening. And without the additional supply to accommodate some form of demand, yes, the affordability will continue to go down the hill. So let's please work together where we can find a solution here, acknowledging and all collectively acknowledging the facts of this scenario, which are at odds at times. They are most definitely at odds. And you know, I'm happy to take calls. I'm happy to talk to folks ultimately to get to a solution. But I'm not happy to pretend that we can have the best of every single world where we're dramatically adding parking and simultaneously keeping it affordable, because that's not going to happen.
I just have, Councilmember Goodwin.
Thank you. I just want to say to the neighbors that that's a give on the developer's part to agree to extend the 60-day rule, and you should understand that and potentially read that as an opportunity to be able to work with them. To be fair, they could roll the dice, move forward, and take a vote on the council. So I think it's a really big compromise on behalf of the developer and his team, and I think that does mean that there's going to be some change. And so I think I just wanted to point that out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. So I think I have some questions that maybe are best answered by staff. So this committee already acted on item 7. So my assumption is that's going to council now. Okay, so just I wanted to be clear on that. The rezoning has been approved by this committee and then would be acted upon by the council. If we postpone this item, I just want to ensure that our city attorney and staff are comfortable with the verbal commitment that we have now. I don't want to, but just it feels like we should ask that question.
Chair Bender, so with Ms. Lansing's voluntary acquiescence to the extension on the record, but she will follow up with a written extension, which is required by the law as well. If we don't get that, of course, we will take, notify the committee and take appropriate measure.
And so then just to be clear in that case, which I don't expect to be the case, then we would act on at the council meeting. Okay, and then I just wanted to raise the question on behalf of everyone here who's come now many times to City Hall on both of these projects. I'm happy to take up the next item and hold the public hearing, but I just want to do kind of a check here to see if we think we're landing at another postponement. Perhaps we should save ourselves a couple of hours and then have the public hearing when we feel like there is more agreement. But I just wanted, I don't know who could speak to that best, but I'll ask the question, maybe Councilmember Fry or staff, if you have a sense of where this project is at, or I don't know, I saw some sort of nodding in the crowd, but I don't know if it, maybe perhaps a spokesperson wants to weigh in.
Well, it seems
like we're dealing with similar issues on both projects, so it would make more sense in my eyes to postpone at this time. Everybody agree?
This is a little unusual. It's very unusual to have two development projects on the same block at our committee. I just want to note. So this is a unique situation. So this is also, we're just sort of having an impromptu discussion, which we don't typically do, but again, it's a little unusual.
Could I ask the committee one question?
Sure. Please.
Robert Riskin again. I just wanted to ask, by rezoning to C3A, is there a potential for, if this development does go through, at some point 5 years down the road, and whether it's viable or not, another owner comes in, decides to tear down these buildings and put up a hotel or a tower or some other thing? Is that potential with rezoning to C3A?
Yeah, so the rezoning would allow for development of the scale at C3A.
To build towers there?
Well,
Not towers.
the C3A zoning allows for 4 stories as of right, up to 6 with a conditional use permit, and then staff could answer the sort of bulk and setback requirements, but they're kind of within the range of what this building has been designed to be. A typical C3A building is 6 stories in Minneapolis. Yeah. So
Well,
I
it's
don't
a
know if the committee
concern
can take action.
that I have for the future of the community, that we don't want that to happen. So I just want that to be part of the record.
Thank you, sir. So I want to make sure we're not having a public hearing here. I did want to give the community a chance to weigh in on the procedural issues. So I mean, so we could move to postpone the rezoning once it comes to council. Maybe Mr. Nielsen. So I think we have 2 options regarding the rezoning. I'm not sure the committee is comfortable going forward with the rezoning ahead of now that we've decided to postpone the rest of the actions. So can the committee take an action now to sort of revisit item 7? Otherwise, I would indicate that perhaps we would do that at council, and so then we would be asking the project team to also commit to that postponement.
Right. Chair Bender, I think a motion to reconsider would be in order here. You're at the same meeting that you had just voted on that, and so that would be appropriate if you would like to do that and keep the items, the agenda items together.
Okay, so I think I would be much more comfortable with that. Again, I want to note, to your point, this project does preserve Dusty's, and so that was a really important piece of this project, so I don't want to sort of lose that portion. So I will move to reconsider. That's a vote? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And so then we are reconsidering item 7, which is the rezoning of the property at 14th and Marshall. So I will just go ahead and move to postpone this item. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. That motion carries. And then I will then, just given our informal discussion, which I appreciate everyone hanging on there with that, I will move to postpone as well by 1 cycle items 2, 3, and 8. That is the land use applications and the rezoning for the other, for the bulk of the rest of the applications for these 2 projects. Any further discussion on those? All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. Okay, so that concludes items 2, 3, 7, and 8. I just want to offer, again, this is very unusual to have so many meetings on 1 or 2 projects, so I just appreciate everyone continuing to come back again and again, and I hope we can get to a resolution here soon. We do still have 1 item left. It's item number 4, the interim use permit for Verizon Wireless at 2407 University Southeast. Just ask staff to come up on this one. This is a item that we have seen before in this committee. I don't know who the staff, Mr. Crandall? No? Who's our staff on this one?
Chair Bender, I don't see our staff person at the moment on this item. Sorry.
Thanks for staying.
Might I suggest that we start with the applicant making their case while I try to contact the staff person?
Oh, here we go. It's okay. Welcome.
I was just sitting, I was like, no, they're postponing.
An unusual, you probably just ran here and you're, yes. Thank you. We'll give you a moment to catch your breath.
Thank you. All right. Sorry.
Catch your breath.
Maybe it might take a little while, so I think I'll get started. Good morning. I think it's still morning. So this is a request for an extension of an interim use permit at the property of 2407 University Avenue Southeast. This is a request from Verizon, excuse me, Virilis. And they currently have a temporary telecommunications tower there. So the site is here. It's about a block from the TCF Stadium, and the temporary facility is located on the northwest corner of the site in the parking area. So here's the temporary tower. As you can see, it's attached to a truck. The mast is 60 feet high. And so the interim use permit was originally approved in 2015, July of 2015. One second. Yeah, it just takes me a while to catch my breath. Okay. Yes, yep, it was, another extension was granted last year, and that was to allow them time to find a permanent location, as this is very temporary. And the reason they're asking or looking for a permanent location is there's been such growth in this area. They have more demand than what their existing coverage can accommodate. So the extension now expires at the end of this month. And I'll add that. So what's here currently is proposed to stay the same, including the screening that they've added. Staff hasn't been aware of any issues with it being there currently. They're asking for the same exceptions that they had asked for previously. There are 4 things there having to do with setbacks from adjacent properties, compatibility, it's not really camouflaged in any way. There's no permanent landscaping or screening at the base, and just the height of the antenna above the mast requires an extension. So that's all the same.
Could I just interrupt? I mean, we've seen this project many
Yeah.
times, so I think we're pretty familiar with the details. I guess the underlying question is why do we keep having to extend it? What is the issue with finding a permanent location? Because ostensibly the reason we're approving this temporary condition that is not ideal in many ways that you were starting to describe. Ostensibly, we've been waiting for a permanent location, but this is
Right.
probably the 3rd time we've
This is the
postponed.
3rd hearing on the
Okay.
interim permit,
So
correct?
could you just give us your perspective as staff on the options for a permanent location and sort of why would we extend it again here?
So the applicant has said that they've been talking to several property owners, but haven't actually come to an agreement at any one location. There are, thank you. There are, of course, a lot of properties in this area, and there's some development going on. So at this time, they're asking for a 3-year extension to, again, allow more time to secure a permanent place. Staff thought that was a bit too long, the concern being, one, its temporary appearance, but also this site itself could potentially be redeveloped. There's a lot of surface parking. It's less density than what we're seeing demand for in this area. So as a staff position, we're recommending only a 1-year extension because, so we're supporting an extension, but a limited one because removing it completely right now could have adverse impacts to people who need cellular coverage in that area.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? I think we'll just open the public hearing and maybe ask if you have a brief comment you'd like to make as the applicant. And I think, the question the committee is going to have is, why should we keep approving temporary extensions when it seems like it's just giving an excuse not to find a permanent location, if I may be blunt?
Understood. Good morning, council members. Thank you again. I'm James Reese with Verizon Wireless. 2 of my colleagues, Katie Poser and John Mullins, also with Verizon Wireless, Real Estate and RF Engineering. Again, unfortunately, we're here today because we were unable to secure our permanent location in time. That, of course, was not our intention when we received the last extension. A typical brand new installation of antennas or building a tower, for example, is 12 to 18-month process. On the good side, can be longer than that for any number of delays. So with that, we unfortunately have to come back and ask for an additional extension. Again, in hindsight, it may have been best to ask for the full extent of a temporary use, which allows up to 5 years. But our objective still is to find a permanent solution. So at the time, that didn't seem like the best course of action. So nonetheless, here we are. I did want to add that having a temporary asset deployed for this length of time is not advantageous for us at all. It takes that out of our fleet for emergencies or other weather-related instances where we need these temporary assets. So there's a cost associated with having it there because of rent from the property owner, and usually the structure of a temporary agreement is different than our permanent sites. So from a business standpoint, there's not a lot of incentive for us to want to stay. We'd much rather have a permanent home. And Katie can speak a little bit more to our development and changes at the U of M.
Yep. So last year we came in front of you folks in order to extend. We had been in good conversations with the landowners in order to get permanent solutions. Last October, they had a change of momentum. So basically, we're starting over again from ground one, starting with getting permanent sites.
Okay. Would you like to say anything else?
Just one additional comment. There's 3 or 4 new structures to would be the southeast, the Wahoo Tower for student housing, and a couple of others. So that substantially changed the opportunity for us to find a co-locatable structure that met the height that we were looking for.
Okay, great. All right, anything else?
That is it from
Okay,
us.
then I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. I was going to move. My motion is to grant the application for a period lasting until September 30th, 2017. That gives 3 months to reach an agreement. If you have an agreement at that time but need more time for the temporary tower to stay in place, I would then consider an extension, but I feel like I'm speaking for myself here. I'm reticent to extend it beyond that myself. 17. I'm giving them 3 months. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I strongly support that. I probably would have said take it down now. So I strongly support what you're suggesting. This is the motive. We're not going to extend it again. I mean, first it was we need to do it during the Viking season. Then it was we couldn't find a location. Now it's we worked with one landlord who now it's followed through. The only way you're going to be motivated to move this thing is to have to. So I would say move it immediately. It's hideous. It looks terrible. And also what it does is it prohibits redevelopment in this location. It generates revenue for the people who own the surface parking lot. It's everything bad. There are plenty of buildings in this area who will take your money for a price to put the cell phone tower on top. I have them all over downtown, and they go up relatively quickly, and it's not that big of a deal. So I'm not sure why it's such a big deal over here, but mainly I think it's a big deal because you've been allowed to have this interim situation. So I would not come back and ask for a further extension unless you have a signed lease you can show us where you've started construction.
Is there any further comment on the motion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. Thanks.
Madam Chair, may I ask one follow-up question?
No, you can ask staff or any of the committee members after. This is our final item, and now we are adjourned. Thank you.
Gotcha. Thank you.